This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
Hello, college football fans, and welcome to the Primetime Podcast. My name is Ricky Widmer, and as always, I'm joined by the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And for those of you guys who are into this kind of thing, you can't just hear us audio style this week on SoundCloud. You also got us video, so thank you and hello to all of our viewers on our YouTube channel. Today we're going to have a jam-packed show. Before I get into the topics, Brandon, how are you doing this evening?
Oh, I'm tired as hell. Don't really want to be here, but that's okay.
Well, it's one of those days. We're doing this on Sunday instead of Monday. Kind of hectic schedules. We're going to get through this one for you guys. We're going to try to keep it nice and upbeat, but we're going to be talking some Big 12 expansion because, you know, it wasn't that long ago. When was that? What day did we post that? It was only early May the last time we talked Big 12 expansion. So we're going to hit that topic again because it looks like we have a little bit of a better idea, not really, of what they're going to do. We're going to look at Nick Saban and Jim Harbaugh to see which coach is more popular among college players. And then we're going to dive into the quarterback situation at Notre Dame. And me and Brandon are going to pick who would we start day one of the season, Malik Zaire or Deshaun Kaiser. But let's start in the Big 12, Brandon, because on July 19th, the conference gave the Big 12 president, they gave him, hey, you know what, you can go out and start investigating candidates in order to invite them in to the Big 12. Here's the big thing, though. We're unsure whether they're going to invite 2 teams, they're going to invite 4 teams, they're going to invite any teams. So I'm going to start this out nice and simple. If you are the president, you're the president of the Big 12 right now, what are you thinking? Are you looking to add 2 teams to this conference? Are you looking to add 4 teams to this conference? What are you doing?
For the Big 12, I think I'd probably be looking to add about 2 teams. I think I'd be looking to add about 2 teams because that's what we're at with the Big 10 right now. Correct? 14 teams. I say you probably go with that, and I think that you come out with an even number then, right? Because, you know, the Big 12, then you add 2, you know, that gets you 14. You keep with that even number of 14, but then you can add an extra team to each side in each division, and then you can, instead of having just one winner at the top from the Big 12 each year, you have a championship. You know, right there. Yeah, a conference championship in the Big 12. And I think that that's something that needs to happen. And, you know, hopefully by adding in 2 teams, I really think 4 may crowd it a little too much. But I think you bring in 2 teams, and then you're able to then separate them into this division and this division. And then at the end, there's a conference championship. I think that's the smart way to go. And hopefully that's the way they are going by looking to add these 2 more teams.
Well, or 4. Right now, I would lean towards... I'm leaning towards 2, and the only reason why I'm leaning towards 2 is right now you're at 10, add 2, see how that goes, having a conference championship game back. Then if you're like, okay, cool, let's add some more teams in there, then you can go ahead and say, okay, we're going to try to add 2 more, because the way I'm kind of thinking about this is if you add 2 teams to this conference, you're kind of the exact same as the Pac-12. You have 12 teams in your conference, 6 over here, 6 over there, and you can do the scheduling much like the Pac-12 does. However, if you go and say, you know, we're going to go ahead and add 4 games, then your scheduling is becoming much like what you mentioned with the Big Ten, because they do have 7-team divisions, and that equals a total of 14 teams overall. And I mean, if I look at that kind of a schedule right away, that means 7 of their 7 of their 9 conference games are in their division. So that means you're only taking 2 teams from the other side each year. And I mean, if it's one of those things where, let's say, Oklahoma and Texas end up being in different divisions, do you always have them play each year? So that would mean Texas would have 8 opponents that they're playing the same each and every year, and they're just cycling in one team from that other division. How do you put these teams together? With me, I think you got to go with 2 teams. You go off of the Pac-12 kind of scheduling where, you know what, you have 5 divisional games each and every year because there's 6 in each division minus yourself. And then you can add those other games with more opponents from the other side and kind of have as close to a balance as you have now.
So one of the things that we had talked about before, too, was the teams that you bring in, they have to be teams that are going to bring in more money because that's what people at the top are looking for. They're looking for what's going to get us paid and what's going to bring in the most revenue. So that's the other thing. You know, what's going to bring in TV ratings? What's going to bring up TV ratings for the Big 12? You know, what are some teams that we could schedule in primetime slots? That's the type of thing that they're definitely going to be looking at. And Ricky, my question to you is that if they're going by that alone, TV ratings, and let's try and bring in the most money that we can, what would be the 2 teams because we both sound like we both said we'll go 2 teams. What 2 teams would you be bringing in?
Well, the first thing I got to look at is I'm looking at the chart. We're looking at an ESPN article. I'm looking at the chart that they have on the side. And if I'm trying to bring in the most revenue to my conference, how do you do that? TV. Get your guys on TV, whether it's Fox Sports, whether it's ESPN. You have to get your guys on those primetime slots and have those big matchups. So the 2 things I'm going to look at on this chart are which teams have a TV market and have a football success. And the ones that I'm looking at, you can do BYU has both of those. You have Cincinnati has both of those. You have Houston, who's very successful and can bring in TV money. Memphis at this time has both of them. And those are the teams that I think you target. To me, the 2 teams that I would pick are Houston and BYU. Because I know, like I said, Memphis, but Memphis just lost their head coach and Coach Fuentes. He's over in Virginia Tech. So I would kind of see what they would do this season with their new head coach before I even think about them. Cincinnati, to me, it's like, they're successful in their conference. Yeah, they bring in some of that TV market. I mean, you can hit kind of that Midwest, but if I'm thinking Ohio, then you're competing a lot with Ohio State, that kind of Big Ten area. I would stay away from that. I would hit Houston, and I know that people right away are going to be like, whoa, Rick, you can't bring in Houston because Texas ain't going to like that. Texas Tech, they're not going to like that because then you have all these teams kind of saying, hey, well, this is our recruiting base. Well, guess what? It ain't your recruiting base. You don't own the recruit until they commit to your school and sign that letter of intent. So if I'm the Big 12, I add in Houston because it's right there in your backyard. It's a successful team is what I'm trying to say, right there. And then BYU, that's another successful team. And it kind of gives you that Western kind of outreach, and it gives you that market that you used to have when Colorado was a part of the Big 12.
Yeah, that's one thing that I was thinking. I would have gone Houston as well. But I was also thinking University of Central Florida because that's a team that I don't think a lot of people were looking at. And Big 12, though, is that after I thought about it for a while, after I kind of looked over it, Big 12, that doesn't really seem like possibly the place for a Florida team. Big 12 seems more, West Coasty kind of.
Well, would it be
or West Coast kind of moving that way, but then you got your Oklahoma, your Oklahoma State and stuff like that. Then you throw in a Florida team that's really not.
Let me ask you
in
this,
the mix. But I
would adding Central Florida kind of be like when the SEC added Texas A&M? Because I would see Texas A&M, I'm like, man, that's kind of a little bit far west where we have all these kind of SEC programs.
More like when the SEC brought in Missouri. I mean,
True.
that's kind of how that would be. We brought in Missouri. We don't know why, because we wanted to have another team, so we just filled it with Mizzou. So that's kind of how I feel like it would be. Would University of Central Florida end up fitting? Yeah, probably. But I think that there are other teams that would fit a little bit better. Like a BYU, would probably fit a little bit better. Houston for sure. Houston's a team that we can both agree on that makes sense. Certainly makes sense. I mean, they may have that rival in Texas. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But they'll both have their own little markets. little. That's funny because they won't be little, but they'll both have their kind of separate markets in a sense of people who are watching this and people who are watching this. But I think that that second candidate, that's almost kind of like your candidate that I think is up for grabs. Kind of like the SEC's Missouri. You needed one more person. All right, Mizzou it is. It's kind of like that kind of team.
And one of the things that I think I've just thought of it now that to me would kind of go into, okay, I'm going to go back really quick to what we started with the 2 to 4, because if I added 2 teams, let's say we'll take Houston and Central Florida because you threw them out. That second team, like you said, could be anything. If I'm taking the teams that are just in the Big 12 right now, if I'm putting them into one conference, Baylor, Texas, TCU, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State would have to be in one conference. However, if I add Houston, I would have to put Houston in there because if I'm the Big 12, I would want a division where I would want all the Oklahoma and all the Texas teams together. However, Oklahoma and Texas have to be in the same division. So all of them have to be together. If I add Houston, that's 7 in that division. That means, I need to add 2 more teams on top of that Central Florida to have the other division at 7. Am I crazy because that way?
Of course you are. But that's why people love you on this channel. Because you're the crazy one.
Why am I crazy for thinking that?
I don't know. I think that's starting to get a little too much of an expansion. You know what I mean? You start talking 7 and 7, people aren't really. You go over 6, and people are like, "What's he talking about? That's too much." I mean, I think some people would say that's too much.
Do you have to keep the Texas schools together?
I would say yeah. I would say that would make the most sense. I think, and I mean, if I brought over, if we, because I have all the say in the world of the Big 12.
I said you were the Big 12 president at the beginning of the podcast.
But I think that if I'm in charge of the Big 12, I would bring on Houston and I would put them in the same conference as, the same division as Texas.
So that would,
absolutely I would, because that rivalry would be great.
So then we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams. 5 teams from the state of Texas. Who's that 6th team to round out that division then?
It can be whoever you want.
Who would you put in there? I'd put Oklahoma, because then I would say, I'm sorry, Oklahoma State, fuck your rivalry. It's all about the Red River Shootout, because that's going to get us more money.
Well, if you go by more money, then it'd probably be Oklahoma. But to be honest with you, I can't think of anybody right now that I would put there.
I mean, realistically, probably you'd put maybe a Kansas, maybe an Iowa State. I know,
Kansas.
Bottom feeders, but geographically in the Big 12, you wouldn't put a West Virginia because they're all the way out. They're the furthest east team of any team in this conference. I think if you add Houston, you have to have all the Texas schools together. You take a non-Oklahoma school, throw it in, you make 6. Then you just have on the other side both the Oklahoma schools and everybody else. And then you have 6 and 6. That's a perfect 12. I'm looking at teams, though, that I don't think are going to make the Big 12. And I look at everybody on this chart we're looking at that does not have anyone who basically has no for a TV market. So Boise State, I'm sorry, you're gone. Colorado State, I'm sorry, you're gone. East Carolina, I'm sorry, you're gone. Those schools, it's like if I'm looking to expand, it's exactly like you said, Brandon. I am looking to bring in more revenue to this conference, and those schools just don't do it.
No, and really the only the only thing with the University of Central Florida, since I brought that up earlier, and most people would be like, wow, that guy is an idiot. Yeah, they only have the TV market. That's all they've got. When you really dig down to the nitty gritty of the rest of it, the football success, it's not there. They really aren't that big in anything else. I mean, they're not known for all this big stuff that would bring a whole lot more outside of, their market. But I think that, it's an interesting decision that they have to make here, But I think that, again, you go with Houston and you go with then really any other team because, of course, a team that's favorable in one of those categories or a couple of those categories, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to probably just throw somebody in there just to throw them in there, and I think that school is going to be okay because guess what? Then they're going to be a Big 12 school, not a schmuckety-muck.
But a non-power, like outside Power 5, non-Power 5, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, schmuck.
What do you think, though? We've been talking enough about they need to increase revenue and bring them in. With Central Florida, you say all they have is that TV market. If you're a fan of the Big 12, would you be okay with a conference bringing in a team just to bring in that money? Or would you say, you know what? Let's say no to the guy who has the TV market because we can bring in a team, and I'm going to bring in Boise State because on the chart they do fit this. They don't have the TV market part, but they have the football success part. What would you rather have? More revenue for your conference? Or, hey, you know what? Let's say no to this TV guy and bring in a team that's going to make it more competitive.
Well, I think that you kind of split it up. I think that if you bring in Houston, and I started keep saying Houston, but that's just a team that makes sense.
They do both.
So that's why you have to say them. Houston is one, and then since they do both, I think you bring in the other one as football success because at the end of the day, you're going to make plenty of money with bringing in Houston. You're going to make plenty of money with the teams that you already have, but we don't want another team like a Kansas or an Iowa State because those teams aren't good. I think that you don't want to bring in another team that you can just beat up on. You want to bring in another team that's successful, so that when you play them, you can say, hey, I beat a good team, not just a cupcake. And I think then that way, then more people will notice your conference for, wow, they have a lot of really, really good teams and a lot of really, really good competition up and down that conference instead of it's stacked at the top and it's crap at the bottom. That's not, there's too many where you look at and you go, oh gosh, it's really good up there, but man, it's like a sinking ship down below. So I think that if you want to do something like that, that would be a smart move. I would go, since you already are bringing in one person, theoretically, in Houston that's going to have both, I think the other one has to be the football success. That only makes more sense to me.
Well, and I mean, you mentioned that you apologize to everyone for bringing up Houston. They hit all the check marks, though. TV market, check. Football success, check. Geographics, check. They check all the boxes that you would want to bring in a team. And if we're looking at teams that do not have football success, from this chart that I'm looking at, that means Central Florida's out, I'm sorry. Then we also have UConn, SMU, South Florida, Tulsa. All of them, or Tulane, all gone. All of them gone. So, Brandon, we're going to end this before we move on into the Jim Harbaugh segment of which two teams, we're making the final decision yet again, like we did back in May.
And they usually always go with our decisions. So.
Which two teams would you bring in? I'm gonna give answers for both the 2 and the 4. If I'm bringing in 2 teams, it's Houston, and then I'm gonna go ahead and bring in, like I said, BYU. If I'm bringing in 4, I bring in Houston, I bring in BYU, I bring in Boise State and Central Florida, because then you're kind of hitting with those last 2, the kind of no TV market success, but hey, this team's got TV market and no success.
Yeah, so with my 2 teams, it would be Houston and it would be Boise State.
You're going to bring in Boise State instead of like a BYU to kind of bring in that, because either team can bring in that like Mountain West kind of geographic.
Sure, yeah, I'm going to bring in Boise State. I know how you're all over BYU. You certainly were last year for a while.
I picked them in most of our weekly pick'ems last year.
Yeah, and it got you. It was good for about 2. It was good for about 2.
What was it, the UCLA game? That was probably the only one where it was good. I can't remember I won or lost that game.
Something like that.
But before we move on, let us know down below in the comment section what you guys think, who you guys would put where, who would you guys add to the Big 12